Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. What was looking like a kind of uneventful election year in the city of Lansing may be perking up thanks to a proposal that would amend the city's ethics ordinance and, among other things, offer public financing of local political campaigns. Here to discuss that today with us are Walt Sorg, who is heading this effort, and Randy Hannon, the Chief of Staff and spokesman for the Bernero administration. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Walt, it's different to have you here not as a columnist for City Pulse, which you no longer do, but to be answering questions.
I don't like asking so much easier.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Tell me why and how this came about for Lansing.
It came about as the result of some inquiries by some residents of the city who saw what had happened in Tallahassee, Florida. Capital of Florida enacted a similar proposal last year by a 2/3 vote. And they saw that, they contacted some folks there and found out there was a national organization that was promoting this around the nation, and they asked, well, can you help us here in Lansing? And as a result of that, things started to come together. I was contacted relatively late in the process because I wanted somebody who was relatively involved in the town politically to help them out with this. And I agree, yeah, I'll be happy to work on this.
So you were not one of the people who
No,
initiated
I was not.
it.
I was not aware of what happened in Tallahassee.
Can you share with us who some of the people were?
I haven't got the list of names with me right here. They're actually people that I'd never met. They were not people that are a part of the normal political circles in Lansing, which is where I tend to meet most people. And I was contacted, though, by Rich Robinson, who's head of the Michigan Campaign Finance Network, who had been contacted as well about this. And Rich is one of those as an individual who's a part of this effort, and I'm really pleased to have him. One of my closest friends as well, somebody I respect greatly. And I got involved because I like the idea of being proactive. Rather than waiting for having a mess like they had in Detroit or like they've had in a lot of other places, let's put the controls in place so that we can maintain the high standards that Lansing has tried to maintain over the years and not have to face this in the future. A lot of times with government, it only reacts after you've had a crisis, and that's more expensive. It's more taxing on the citizenry. It creates more distrust in government. If you can avoid having the problem in the first place by putting in place some reasonable controls, some reasonable safeguards, it's a lot better way to go about it, and that's why I was for this.
Randy, what's your general reaction to this proposal?
Well, our general reaction is that it's a solution in search of a problem. We have a long history in Lansing of having strong ethics standards. We have a strong board of ethics. We have requirements for financial disclosures by top elected officials. So we're not an island of non-compliance or whatnot in terms of ethics and standards and so forth. And we have a long history of that. More recently, in the last 10 years, while Mayor Bernero has been in office, there have been exactly 0 sustained ethics complaints against our administration or against city council members. So that's why we say that it's really a solution in search of a problem. We have pretty strong ethics standards here. We have financial disclosure for elected officials, but we're really talking about 3 different things. One is ethics standards, and we're fine, of course, having a discussion about that. There's lobbyist registration at the city level, which is, I believe, unprecedented in Michigan anyway.
No, that's not true.
And the third piece of it is the public financing of campaigns. And that's also an issue of first impression, at least here in Lansing. Now, there are significant questions about whether those last two pieces are legally viable or not. There's analysis going on right now, a legal review, but it's questionable whether cities can actually regulate in the area of campaign finance or in the area of lobbying, because both the State Lobbying Act and the State Campaign Finance Act have language that says that the local communities cannot adopt standards that are stricter than the state in both of those areas of jurisdiction.
All right,
So-
and well, we'll get to your response in a moment, but Todd Haywood wrote our story on this week, and we'll be covering this issue for us. He's here with us to ask questions. Todd, do that.
Sure. Well, I wanted to ask you, I mean, this is being pitched as a local run issue, but your funding has been so far $25,000 from a national
Right.
organization. They say they're prepared to spend up to $50,000. Are you going to do local fundraising?
No.
So is
not
this
necessary.
really local if you're spending nothing but national cash on this?
It's the signatures are all local. The people that are advocating it are all local. The people it represent us. Very open about their finances, as you know. You know exactly who's financing them, and they exist to help groups like us do this, so we can avoid the mechanics of going through fundraising, which I hate. I hated it as a candidate, and I still hate it, and focus on the substance of the issue. They're providing the technical support. And it's ultimately a local decision. We've been very open about their involvement, to make no bones about it, and we're very grateful for it. If they didn't exist, yeah, we probably wouldn't have gone through this effort, because quite honestly, it's a lot to take on.
Go ahead, Todd.
Well, Randy, do you have any response to that? Does it concern you that it's out-of-state money that's financing this issue? That it's not
Well,
local?
it does appear to be strongly influenced by an outside organization, and I don't think that the organization behind this campaign has been as forthcoming as you might expect for an organization that's all about transparency, for example. I visited the website of what I think is the parent organization behind this, and on the website it says, if you want to know who's funding us, send us an email and we'll tell you. Well, why not just put it on the website? And
Did you send them an
apparently,
email?
I have not.
You should.
I could. Apparently, there's a, pardon me, the money for, or the organization for collecting the signatures is out of California as well. And it's a free country, you can hire anybody you want. But a truly local initiative would use grassroots support and grassroots petitions and so forth to get the job done.
Well, your response to that, and also the specter Randy has raised of a legal challenge.
Okay, well, let me talk first about the involvement of Represent Us. That's kind of
That's the
attacking
national organization in
That's kind of
California.
attacking the messenger, not the message. When you get right down to it, it's the substance of the proposal. Is the substance of the proposal good? It doesn't really matter in the end who is funding it, unless we're hiding it and we had a hidden agenda, which we haven't done. Now, as far as the legal challenges, first of all, the City of Detroit does have lobbyist regulation and registration. The standards that are in the ordinance are comparable to what the state requires of lobbyists now. It is not more strict than what the state requires of state lobbyists. And this does not regulate campaign finance. There's no regulation of campaign finance. It is strictly reimbursement to registered voters in the City of Lansing who choose to make a small contribution to a city campaign. It's capped at $25 per registered voter per odd-numbered year when we have city elections. Even-numbered years, there's no reimbursement. Now, the numbers, we actually hurt ourselves in the proposal. We put in these large caps for city council years and for mayoral years of six figures, 450,000 and 900,000. I started figuring out the numbers. In a mayoral year, if we were to hit 900,000, we would have to have contributions from 36,000 different Lansing registered voters, or half the registered voters in the city. You know, that's never going to happen. I was looking at the mayor's campaign finance report just to get a feel for how many people actually contribute from the last election. And in terms of people who actually live in the city of Lansing, we're talking hundreds, a few hundred. I didn't count them up. I'm going to do that because I really hadn't anticipated this being that big a deal. But I think the reality is this proposal would cost very, very little in the beginning. It would encourage candidates to really foster grassroots involvement in their campaigns with small contributions. I think that's a good thing. and at a very, very low cost. You know, we've thrown around numbers, six-figure numbers. Randy at one point said it was $1 million a year, which was just way out of line.
We never said $1 million a year.
No, that was a correct. We
Was a
corrected
correction?
that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But $1 million in a mayoral election year.
That would be if 36,000 people claimed compensation and out of 79,000 registered voters.
Well, Randy, was your point primarily that in addition to the reimbursement costs, that there will be administrative costs for the city?
Oh, no question.
I calculated it would
Both.
be at most
If I can answer, please.
1.5
It's a question to
FTEs.
me. Thank you. The prospect of having both the Board of Ethics have staff to administer the lobbying registration or the campaign finance piece, and the city clerk needing staff to administer the lobbying registration piece will necessarily involve additional costs to the city government. Whether that requires additional employees, we don't know because it's, you know, we don't know what the framework exactly looks like yet. But they're very clearly costs. And just taking the proposal on its face value and the numbers that are in it, the cost of a city council year could approach $500,000, and a mayoral year could approach $1 million. Now, by the math that Walt suggests, it could be significantly less than that. But we could still be talking easily into the high hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so the cost has to be compared to the benefit. Walt has said that the benefit is that we'll avoid having a Kwame-like ethical problem here in Lansing. Well, Lansing doesn't have a culture of ethical challenges in the same fashion as Detroit has had in the past. In fact, as I've noted, there's not been a single sustained ethics complaint against our administration or a city council member in the last 10 years. So again, I go back to it's a solution in search of a problem, and a relatively expensive solution at that. And when we continue to be challenged as a city for things like filling potholes and keeping police on the streets and core functions of city government, it seems that you could go at this in a less taxing fashion. And you could also do it in a way that's a little more, I think, respectful of local officials and the local democratic process. We have a city council. I'm sure they would be very amenable to having a conversation about the city's ethics ordinance and whether it needs to be tightened. They would, I'm sure, be happy to have a conversation about whether lobbying ought to be regulated in the city or whether it can be. And the same thing with the public financing of campaigns. These are three separate and important issues, each one of them, that I think would benefit from a robust discussion through the normal channels of legislating in this town. And the other thing that would benefit from that is that this proposal, to my knowledge, hasn't been vetted by any city, by the city's legal counsel, for example, which is an option that's available to people who run initiatives, is they can bring their proposal to the city attorney to be reviewed in advance, and they might point out some of the issues that, if there are issues, that would be problematic. I don't think the campaign availed themselves that opportunity, and as a result, I think on a very preliminary basis, the legal analysis isn't complete yet, but on a very preliminary basis, there's some problems with the proposal that could end up in court challenges. Theoretically, it could even result in it not making the ballot at all.
Now, I will point out a little bit of research that in Tallahassee, which passed the 67%, and passed after the city attorney fought it and lost. Let me also tell our viewers where this stands right now. By Wednesday, July 1st, City Clerk Chris Swope will have to decide if there are at least 4,000 valid signatures of Lansing voters. But you turned in over some 6,700 approximately.
Roughly 6,700.
Yeah, and so it appears likely 4,000 of them are going to be valid. Todd?
Well, I think one of the questions I have, I mean, you've pointed out several times now that there are sort of three segments to this proposal, Randy. And does the mayor support the lobbying registration idea? Does he support the idea of tightening the ethics standards and expanding them to include, top paid deputies?
Well, I think he wouldn't have any problem with consideration of the ethics ordinance and whether it needs to be strengthened. I don't think he'd have any problem having a debate about lobbying registration or about public financing of campaigns. But we're not really having the opportunity to have that debate in the context of a normal process where the city council sees a proposal and we all debate about it, and the city attorney weighs in and other stakeholders weigh in. So we haven't had that opportunity in this case. I can tell you that he's opposed to the proposal as written. Now, if there were the individual components, we'd want to give each of those a fair hearing. But taken together, again, it's burdensome on the city, it's burdensome on taxpayers, and for a purpose that doesn't seem to be a problem. So I get the idea of prevention and so forth, but I don't think that we have a problem that merits the expense that this proposal would
Well,
bring
and
about.
let me throw in here, well, I do want you to respond to what Randy just said, but let me throw in here, I spoke yesterday to a spokesman for Represent Us, the national organization behind this, Dan Krasner, and I relayed to him the mayor's position, this is a solution in search of a problem. He said, well, what about the 527 account? Would this in any way affect the mayor's ability to have this account where developers and anyone can contribute as much as they want?
No.
So what is the problem here? Because even that one that the national spokesman pointed out as a problem wouldn't be affected by this.
Well, part of the problem is with the campaigns themselves and whether getting more grassroots involvement in campaigns. That's the rationale behind the campaign contribution reimbursement. And again, I'm just using the mayor's campaign finance report because it's the most recent. It was the largest, obviously, for the last campaign. Most of his money came from larger contributions. A lot of it came from outside the city. Quite a bit came from outside the state. Nothing wrong with any of that, but it would be good if more citizens of the city of Lansing got involved in the processes, and this is one way to encourage them at a very low cost. Despite Randy's projections, I'm actually going to put together what this would have cost in the 2013 election in terms of reimbursements, make a reasonable estimate on how much for administration time, and I think it's going to come out to $50,000, $75,000 a year when all is said and done. I can't guarantee that because I haven't put the numbers down on it, but just in perusing the campaign finance reports.
I have sort of two angles here that I need to follow up on. The first one is, you keep saying that you want this to be more grassroots oriented, you want more people involved. So is it inappropriate to estimate that in fact we may be able to engage 38,000 voters to hit the ceiling in an election year for the mayor?
Yeah, it's ridiculous to think that that's ever going to happen.
But what if it's half that? Where is that money going to come from?
Right.
Again, you're projecting something that isn't going to happen. It's like saying, what if a nuclear explosion goes off in the middle of the election? What's going to happen? It's not going to happen.
Well, so how many people will be encouraged to contribute?
I would hope it would be several thousand, ultimately. But if it was 2,000, we'd be talking 50.
More in addition to those who already contribute.
Yeah, right now we're probably looking in the hundreds.
Okay.
And so maybe, even if, I'll just give you one number. If it went up to 3,000, which would be an awful lot based on what I know about campaign fundraising for local campaigns and what I think you know about it, of people who are actually eligible. Remember, it's only registered voters in the city of Lansing. It does not apply to people who live out of town and do business in the city, who are it's perfectly appropriate for them to donate, but they don't get reimbursement. And it's only one time per person per election cycle for $25. But if it was 3,000 eligible contributions, you'd be looking at $75,000 every other year.
All right, but the one thing I've already heard from somebody is politicians are just going to laugh at this. This is just going to be another revenue stream for them. And your argument is it's not going to be as much money as it could be, therefore it's even less important, but it just puts more money in their pockets.
Well, you can go back and forth on this. The mayor's on record supporting public financing, for crying out loud. He's been very supportive of it in the past.
Is the problem with the mechanism for it, or if the
No,
mayor
I think
supports it?
just on first impression, we don't have any problem with public financing. We have it at the state level, in gubernatorial races at least. And in concept, it's not a bad idea. I think the number one question is it legal in Michigan to do it? And the state's preemption of campaign finance suggests that perhaps it's not. We'll let the lawyers weigh in on that. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say, but that is a significant concern. We can only operate within the bounds of law as it stands today in Michigan. And if we want to have a debate about and maybe advance a proposal about public financing for a broader array of elections, I think we would welcome that. Who's going to pay for it? What's the mechanism behind it? That's all certainly worthy of public conversation. position. And I could see a scenario where the dynamics of campaign finance and campaign contributions changes significantly, and maybe for the better to some extent. But from a candidate standpoint, and having been involved in a number of elections, a candidate can go to people and say, give me $25 for my campaign and you'll get it back. So it doesn't cost you anything. And I would think that could have a potentially dramatic impact on how many people contribute to campaigns, and therefore escalating the cost to the city for it. So taken together, it's just not clear that the benefits that we would derive from this proposal are justified by the costs that would be involved.
Well,
Yeah, I would like to address a couple things. Earlier, Randy talked about basically create an equivalency between this and fixing potholes, which is ridiculous. The city has core functions, public safety, infrastructure being right on the top, but it does a lot of things that are not core functions already. We're talking about something that would be a tiny part of 1% of the city budget when fully implemented. If it capped out, which it never would, but if it capped out, it would only be 1/4 of 1% of the budget. The reality is it'll be less than 1/10 of 1% of the budget because of people not getting involved. And that money, the 6,700 people who signed these petitions say that is a priority with us, and it would be up to the mayor and the city council to figure out how to include that priority in a budget that already, as you pointed out yesterday in your interview with Dan, already funds golf courses and entertainment downtown at the Common Ground. Snoop Dogg is partially subsidized, and a lot of other, the baseball field, and on and on. There's a lot, and I'm not saying these are bad things, but it's about priorities for the city. Secondly, we're not regulating campaign finance in this proposal. We are providing refunds to taxpayers who make small contributions, who are taxpayers in Lansing and who are registered voters in Lansing. And I did want to ask Randy one question, because he's talked a lot about legal challenges. Are you prepared to go to court to stop the people from voting on this? Are you threatening that?
well, doesn't he have a responsibility
No, I think,
to make sure a proposal put on the ballot is legal?
I can speak for myself.
I'm just asking. I'm asking the question.
What we're doing here is what we're required to do, which is our due diligence from a legal standpoint on a public policy proposal that is proposed to be enacted here in the city of Lansing. That's our job. We have to do that. I can't speak to what we may or may not do from a legal standpoint, but just on the preliminary review, I'm not convinced that this proposal is going to pass legal muster. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but all of which I think we'll wait for the analysis of the city attorney. And we've heard, frankly, from some outside experts on things like campaign finance who've raised some of the same issues, that it may be inconsistent with state law in terms of the preemption and being more restrictive than state law. But I do want to go back briefly to Walt's dismissing, really, of my concern about things like potholes and public safety. We've just come through the worst economic crisis in this country's history since the Great Depression, and it's had an enormously negative impact on the city's budget and on our ability to provide core services. In fact, it's almost amazing that we've been able to do what we've been able to do with a budget that, by in inflation-adjusted terms, is less than the last budget Mayor Hollister proposed, significantly less, given increase in cost of energy and healthcare and other areas. So it's the bottom line is that every dollar counts. Every dollar is important, and if we're talking about hundreds of thousands, perhaps many hundreds of thousands of dollars for this proposal, it is in direct competition with other priorities of the city. And I have all great respect for the people who sign the petition, but generally speaking, when you go up on somebody's door and you pitch a proposal to them, you're not necessarily pointing out the downside of the proposal or the cost of the proposal potentially to people. So I'm not sure how fully informed people were about what the consequences of their signature were, but we'll accept it on face value that there's a significant number of people who support some aspects of this proposal. Given that, it should get a fair hearing, it should get a fair review legally, but if it doesn't pass legal muster, it doesn't pass legal muster. And then the question becomes, does it go on the ballot? If it goes on the ballot and if it's approved, does anyone then challenge it legally to say this piece or that piece doesn't pass muster?
Walt, you suggested that you don't think there is a legal problem with public financing on the local level, but has anyone actually studied that in Michigan? Has your group looked at that?
Yeah, the lawyers who drafted this looked very carefully. Are experts in state law as well as studying the Lansing
Are
ordinances.
these local lawyers, or are Michigan lawyers?
The
or
chief
these-
drafter was Mark Brewer.
Mark Brewer,
You're both very
former
familiar with.
Democratic chairman.
Former Democratic state chair and recognized expert in election law.
Does he support this, or does he just examine this?
I haven't talked to him about whether he supports it. I assume he does, but he did the bulk of the drafting.
Okay. Todd?
We keep talking about the cost of the budget, and Randy brought up potholes and police officers, and you kind of minimized that, and your response is, look, it's going to be a priority. City council and the mayor have to address that. You're leading up an effort to lead this. You have a responsibility as well to identify where would you cut the budget.
That's
to pay
ridiculous,
for this?
Todd. I'm not an expert in the budget. I'm talking about something that is almost a rounding error for a $120 million budget, 110, something
Approximately.
like that.
The general fund budget.
Yeah, it's a rounding error is what we're talking about, and I'll get those numbers to you as soon as I get them calculated, because I really hadn't expected to spend a lot of time talking about this minimal expense, but apparently the mayor wants to make a big deal of it. And I've already estimated if it was fully implemented, we'd probably be looking at probably the equivalent of two clerks, full-time equivalent clerks in City Hall, which is a significant expense. That would be if it was fully utilized.
But the city is facing challenges on a number of fronts.
Certainly it is.
Inspectors and that sort of thing. Two clerks is not necessarily something insignificant.
Absolutely. It's a question of priorities. And this, to me, is a priority. Stronger sunshine in state government so we can see who's lobbying city government. We could find out what they're spending to lobby city government. We could find out if there are some financial ties between our elected officials and top appointed officials and people who do business with the city. Those sorts of things are very important.
But why can't you find those out in any way? Why
You
do
can't.
need
There's no
this?
lobbyist registration in Lansing.
But you said, I thought, that there was, lobbyists had to identify themselves.
No.
No?
Lobbyists register with the state.
With
And
the
at this
state.
point, the state has main jurisdiction for regulating lobbying activities. We're lobbied occasionally in city government, but not as often as state government by a fraction, really. Occasionally you'll have a lobbyist come around who's interested in something, but city government doesn't do a lot of things the lobbyists are particularly interested in. The lobbying core that exists in downtown Lansing is principally focused on the state legislature,
But
and
how do
that's where the game of lobbying and so forth happens. So it's not very frequent in city government, and in fact the city government itself is a lobbyist.
Does this come down to a definition of lobbyist?
And there's a very tight definition in there, but if that's the case, Randy, then you're not going to have very much administrative overhead for it.
I would suspect that might be the case, but administrative overhead is administrative overhead, and it's additional responsibilities that the clerk's office would have to take on, and that's going to require additional hours at the least, and potentially additional
Chris
staff
Swope is
to
a
do
very
that.
effective and efficient administrator.
Well, he has
Wait
the
a
same
minute, I have
limitations
to
on his
raise
resources.
this issue. The lobbying definition is tight enough that, if Pat Gillespie is trying to get something passed through, he's going to have to register as a lobbyist because he's going to spend $250 a month trying to push his proposal through or get his proposal pushed.
Good.
So you're saying that local developers should have to register as
Absolutely. If they're lobbying the city, the people of the city have a right to know. The mayor's made deals in the past, and I'm not saying there's anything improper about them, but he's done them totally in secret, and it's raised a lot of ire in the city. A couple of deals. I had a call this morning from somebody about one of them, the apartment tower. I forget the name of the building. The mayor wanted to sell to Davenport College. There was a lot of controversy over the Hope soccer field and the secret deal that was made there.
All right,
Let me put a stop to that one if I can. There have been no secret deals. There are business transactions that have to be negotiated, not in the public eye. A leading example, that would be the accident fund project, $182 million. It was under wraps. Walt would call it secret. It was under wraps for a year before it was rolled out publicly. But in the end, every business proposal, including the Hope Soccer Complex, including Oliver Towers, all are fully vetted in the public eye.
We are out of time. Randy Hannon, Walt Sword, Todd Haywood, thanks so much. We'll be back next week. Have a great weekend.